Jane, thank you so much for attending Innovations in Recovery this year. It was such an honor to have you open our conference.
Thank you.
And I think your talk this morning, I wish everybody could have seen it in person, but it was one of these things that I think really sparks that creativity that we really need in all of our programs in our industry.
Thank you. That's terrific.
Excellent. Well, I wanted to start today in preparing for this interview and watching some of your previous talks. You had referenced an interesting study that came out of East Carolina University that talked about the use of games in depression. And I was wondering if you would reflect and comment a little bit more on that study and what you've seen in your game research.
Sure. Well, there was an amazing study done at East Carolina University that was inspired actually by a senior executive in the video game industry who, when they surveyed their players to find out why they were motivated to play, they found that a large number reported that they were self-treating depression and anxiety with these casual games. So games like Angry Birds or Candy Crush Saga, Words with Friends, these short, simple games. And so the senior executive thought, if players are kind of self-medicating with these games, maybe we should find out if this is effective, is this helpful or maybe not a helpful behavior. So they worked with East Carolina University to run randomized controlled trials, different studies of using these games for 30 minutes a day to impact depression and anxiety. And they actually found that they were more effective than the traditional pharmaceutical therapies, that within 6 weeks of playing, that they were able to improve their mood for longer and to report fewer symptoms of depression and anxiety. And there's all kinds of amazing brain science to suggest why this would be true. They ran brain scans and biofeedback studies, and it seems like there are powerful positive emotions provoked by playing these games that linger after you've played that can help you combat depression and anxiety.
You mentioned as we were preparing for the interview that you had done some work with Nike and their Fuel Band. Do you find a much correlation with the gaming industry and the healthcare industry? Is there a strong connection yet it's been developed yet?
Absolutely. There's such a commonality between players who are so goal-oriented and people who are trying to make a change in their lives. Personal transformation and games actually have a lot in common because you set this epic goal for yourself. There'll be obstacles in the way. You need the help of allies and mentors who can help you prepare for the obstacles. And so the health industry and sports industry and really all sorts of habit-forming groups are looking towards game design as a way to power people up to make change in their real lives.
Now, when you talk about game, of course, I think the first thing that we all relate to is video games. Do you draw a huge distinction between video games and then more what I grew up with tabletop games and role-playing games? Is it the same type of practice, I guess, when you're doing your research, or is there a difference?
There's a whole range of benefits that you can get from playing games. Some are specific to the new technology and some aren't. So just to give you an example, the ability to control your attention, to focus your mind on something other than depressing thoughts that you might be ruminating on or anxious thoughts that might be provoking a panic attack. It turns out that video games are better for this kind of focused attention than traditional games because of the way that they stimulate the brain. So if you can absorb the visual processing center of the brain, or you have somebody engaged in a very intense mental activity that we might more often associate with something like Tetris, right, where you're totally focused, block out everything else. You can't have that recurring thought going on. Now, if you're sitting at a table and you're waiting for somebody else to take their turn at Scrabble, or you're playing golf and maybe you're walking from one hole to another, it doesn't have that same powerful intervention. But other benefits of games, like the social resilience you can build from spending time in a positive context with other people, that can be any kind of game. So it's a balance. Some seem to be specific to digital interventions.
Right. You had mentioned in one of your previous talks about 4 traits that I guess gamers or games exhibit, and you had named them: urgent optimism, social fabric, blissful productivity, and epic meaning. And when I was reflecting on that, I was wondering if you've ever thought about a correlation between games and those traits and 12-step fellowships. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned it earlier with allies. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Well, that's very interesting. I had not previously thought about it, but of course, you think about the 12-step program, and it is a kind of leveling up, right? So when you play a video game, the first level is something anybody can do, and it's a step that helps you feel like you have made progress towards a goal, and that maybe you are now starting to amass resources. And every level that you play helps you amass more resources, whether they're social or mental, emotional. And it does seem to me that a 12-step program works in that same kind of leveling up way, and you really are developing additional resources that make it possible for you to take more ambitious and difficult steps. And so I do think that making that analogy or comparison could be really helpful, especially for people who feel capable and competent in game worlds to feel capable and competent through recovery.
I think it's an interesting, you had a question this morning from the audience that talked about one of the clinicians that talked about one of the professionals gets frustrated at gamers wasting time. And I thought that was, we've got to figure out what are these connections to be able to take people from this view of gamers. And I think a lot of it may have to do with maybe the age gap, between professionals and younger folks. But I think there's a definite connection there.
Yeah, and there's nothing more devastating to particularly a young person to be told that something they're passionate about, something that energizes them and makes them feel optimistic is somehow bad or pathetic and a waste of time. That is a terrible message to be sending. We're really sending to this whole generation, because 99% of boys play video games under 18, 94% of girls are playing them. To tell this whole generation that they've wasted so much time is a real travesty, and we can do so much better by telling them you've invested this time in developing these skills and strengths. It's good news. You can use these skills and strengths at school, in pursuing your career, in overcoming obstacles in your life. Let's make them feel powerful. Let them feel optimistic and capable, not just in games, which they're passionate about, but also in their lives.
So we created Heroes in Recovery, which we kind of featured a little bit this morning before your talk. And we did that to try to challenge the stigma that's in society around people that are in recovery. There are 23 million Americans that need help for addiction and mental health issues, and only 4 million seek it each year. So that leaves us huge 19 million people, the size of the state of Michigan, that are afraid to reach out and get help. So when we're creating Heroes, the idea was that we would create this platform where people can share stories, and those stories would be the power to encourage, that somebody could read one of the thousands of stories and they'd find some little bit of themselves, and maybe that would help remove that stigma and therefore lower the barrier to treatment. Can you think of could you give us any tips from your research that we could apply to a social movement like Heroes?
Absolutely. So a big part of the Super Better game design is this idea of crafting a heroic persona. In order to do that, you have to be able to talk about strengths that you have. Superman has super heroic physical strength, but other heroes might have incredible grit and determination, or the ability to love and be loved, and to have that ability to nurture someone else. Whatever your strength is, that becomes the basis for your heroic identity. So, when I was recovering from my concussion, I was Jane the Concussion Slayer, and I was trying to really have that kind of that grit, that readiness to do battle. But when I had to use the same Super Better rules when I was trying to get pregnant and go through IVF treatment and try to start a family, instead of being a slayer, I became a fertility goddess. And I tapped into a different set of strengths of my ability to love and be loved. And so if we can help people identify the strength that's most relevant to their challenge at hand, and then that becomes the basis for telling heroic stories about ourselves. That's really the trick to unlocking that heroic sense of purpose.
Well, you have a great quality how you can share your personal story. And it was interesting this morning when you were sharing your story about your traumatic brain injury that you suffered a few years ago. And I was wondering if you could comment about the post-traumatic growth, because a lot of people that are coming through our programs suffer from some type of trauma. And I was fascinated to think that we do focus on post-traumatic stress a lot. And I was wondering, I was fascinated at your comments about post-traumatic growth, and I thought they were so appropriate for our industry.
Yes, and it is such a relief for people to hear that they may not be stuck in this kind of negative downward spiral forever, that there is an upward spiral that can also happen. So post-traumatic growth was discovered, within the last decade, really. There's a robust amount of scientific literature now documenting that it is a real phenomenon, and it happens to people who have to wrestle with a major traumatic experience, but who use it as a springboard to learn about their own strengths and capabilities, to feel closer to friends and family, and to give themselves permission to live according to their values or to pursue dreams. It sort of frees them from whatever expectations they had about what they should do or what they have to do, and lets them lead lives that are truer to their dreams. And there are a lot of things that you can do to facilitate post-traumatic growth instead of just post-traumatic stress. And so that is what we've been trying to do with Super Better. People can do it very simply by trying to bring that sense of heroic persona. If people can tell a heroic narrative about their experience, that's actually one of the most effective predictors of post-traumatic growth. So I think that's why I got so excited looking at the Heroes in Recovery program, because I know that that's one of the most powerful triggers for post-traumatic growth, is when someone at the end of the month or the year can say, this has been my heroic journey. That is an extremely powerful predictor of post-traumatic growth.
Well, that's wonderful. Now, you have a new book coming out. It's titled Super Better. When will that be available?
September 15th.
Excellent.
You can order it now.
Well, we will make sure that at our Moments of Change conference in Palm Beach, that we'll have to have a special, make sure that our bookseller, has many copies available for our attendees.
Great. I'd like to come back for that.
Excellent. We'd love to have you.
Great.
Well, listen, thank you so much for making the time to come to San Diego, and we're just so honored to have you open our conference this year.
Oh, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jane.
Sure.